Oh, and it's welcome back. Second show of the week. Mainly, it's just got a little bit sort of crammed with my guests, and I cannot thank my present guest so much for joining me. His name is Scott Bourne. Scott, welcome to my show.
Hey, Paul, thanks for inviting me. It's lots of fun to be in England, so to speak.
Yeah, you're there. You're there through the wire. So yes, it's
Yeah.
fantastic. This link up that we've got, Scott. I know you're busy. Thank you so much for joining me. It really is much appreciated, Scott. I'm going to start the show off. We've just been talking before the show started about your motor racing, that you were motor racing before you, when in actual fact, had a driving license. Now, I
Yeah.
normally ask what was the first camera you experienced. So I'm going to ask you, what was the first car you drove?
Actually, the very first car I ever drove was a British car. It was an MG Midget. Uh,
Fantastic.
yeah, and but yeah, I got involved in kart racing when I was a little boy, and then graduated to what we call midgets, USAC, United States Auto Club here in the States, and then moved up from there into more serious open wheel driving. But it was always a hobby because God made me in a football player's body, and you have to have a horse jockey's body to be a race driver. But I always had an interest in it, and it actually is what led to my career in photography, because my first published photograph was when I made it the Indianapolis 500.
All right.
Decades, more than 40 years ago, I think, around 40 years ago. I can't keep track anymore. I'm so old. But anyway, Tom Sneva hit the wall in the short chute of the second turn right in front of me. I was a green kid, had no clue what I was doing, but I did have a photo pass that let me on the track. And because he did it right in front of me, I accidentally got the shot. And it ran in 2,000 newspapers the next day, and I got a check for $2,000 at the time. That was enough to buy a new Camaro. And I said, okay, I'm going to do this photography thing.
Yeah, that's right. I don't blame you. It's interesting actually, because my guest last night from Canada, Patrick LaRock, was a musician. I've spoken to so many people that were musicians before they became photographers. You are the first motor racing driver come photographer. So that's a first.
I minored in music at Indiana University, so I got that too.
There we go. Swing double. Well done indeed. Well done for that. Okay, so going back to my original question, which I always ask my guests, can you remember the first camera that you had in the household?
Yeah,
when you were a young kid.
It was a Kodak Brownie.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the very first one I ever played with was a Kodak Brownie. The first serious camera I got in high school, well, junior high school, I was dating a girl named Jackie Russell. Her father's name was Jack Russell, and he was a working photojournalist at the major newspaper in town. And he gave me a Nicromat FTN.
Wow. Yeah.
And he did that with the idea, I think, that he'd keep me out of trouble. Little did he know what I did with that first roll of film. But anyway, he was sort of my first teacher. He gave me the basics, gave me that Nicromat, and that was the first serious 35 millimeter camera that I had. And of course, I've literally shot with pretty much every camera in the world since then.
I was gonna say, coming on to that later on, that I get an impression that obviously with your line of your podcast and all your workshops, that you've had a great opportunity to work with loads of cameras.
Very lucky man. I've got to work with the best.
Yeah, you are indeed. So let's just talk about school very quickly. Was there any real interest in photography at school whilst you were being educated, for want of description?
They didn't tell me about any art classes or anything like that when I went to school, so I wasn't aware of them. Found out later there were. I didn't, when I went to college, I had made a deal with my dad that I would try to become a lawyer because he was a lawyer. And so I majored in political science, which was a good pre-law degree. I never became a lawyer, thank God. But I minored in music because there was no degree in photography at Indiana University. I wanted to go to a school called Brooks Institute of Photography in Santa Barbara, California, which was the preeminent place to learn photographic stuff at a college level. But it was extremely expensive, and back at the time I was so broke I couldn't afford to pay attention, so that wasn't going to happen. So no formal schooling, just hard knocks.
Okay, so straight from school, you've qualified, you got yourself a degree in music. What did you? Was it your passion really just stay in motor racing at that stage?
Well, I was photographing motor racing professionally even while I was in college. I got a job at Hemmings Motorsports News, making a grand total of $52.50 a week. I actually traveled the world with that job for 6 years. During that time, I never got a raise, and it dawned on me that maybe I wasn't very good at it, or that they were very cheap. I wasn't sure which, but I knew there wasn't much future in it. So I switched over to wedding and portraits, and started making real money because that was far more lucrative.
Sure.
But I spent 6 years traveling the world, and I got to meet my heroes in the racing world. So it was really a great gig. It's sort of like a concert photographer that gets to hang out with rock stars all day. It was that kind of thing. And they took pity on me. I was a young kid, and they'd let me sleep in the race vans and let me eat at the crew meals because, making a couple $100s a month, there wasn't a lot of money. But I learned a lot about, how to make stuff work. And of course, our audience will be chagrined to know this was all film. I had to process it myself. There was no Photoshop. There was no Facebook. There was no email. It was just, the old-fashioned way.
Rolls of film and get it back to the studio as quickly as you could. Can you just give me, I'm not going to be rude to ask you how old you are, but can you just give me a rough idea?
I'm an age. Listen, I'm so old. I'm the oldest man in photography. I just turned 62. I just turned 62.
62. That wasn't going to be my question. My question was can you just give us an idea of the motor racing drivers that you were fortunate enough to meet in that time when you were a young kid? I've
hung out with from the your side of the world, Jimmy Clark, the incredible Jimmy Clark.
Really?
Yeah, Mr. Jimmy Clark was one of my early favorites. Of course, all the big names in the U.S. AJ Foyt, still friends with Mario Andretti. Pablo Montoya has actually been my race coach recently. He won the Indianapolis 500 a couple of years ago. I've worked with pretty much all of them.
That listing itself is enough. And Mario Andretti and Jim Clark. Well, he was just one of those guys, wasn't he? He's just amazing.
He was amazing. He was one of the most talented drivers during his time. He's way ahead of his time.
I think one of the amazing stories I heard about him was he was told by his agent he had to go and live in Paris because he was losing too much money in tax in the UK. Right. And he went over to Paris and he lived there. He wasn't enjoying it out there. I think he split with his girlfriend as well. When he came back, he got straight into the Lotus. He'd never driven it. He'd never practiced with it. He got straight into the Lotus at a Grand Prix and won.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of driver he was.
That's the kind of driver he was. Is that today? Can you imagine that happening today? No chance. No
and of course, more recently and very sadly, I had worked a lot with Danny Weldon, who is from the United Kingdom and who was killed right in front of me at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, and that's the last race I ever photographed.
It's a shame. Yeah, I remember the name Danny Weldon. Definitely remember the name.
He's a great driver.
That's a great part of your life there and the history there, basically, which I must be honest, I wasn't really 100% aware of. I knew you'd done.
Well, it's so long ago, Paul, that that's the thing is I've been around so long that I've lived like 4 lifetimes. So I don't expect people to keep track of stuff that's ancient history, nor does most of it matter. The last couple of decades I've spent primarily as a bird photographer, which has very little relationship to motorsports other than the birds fly fast and so do the cars.
Right. This is what I was going to come on to, actually, because I got your website up. We're going to go to screen share shortly. And I noticed that predominantly on your website, it is bird photography. Can I ask you straight, why bird photography?
I'm insane. I just, I'd done pretty much everything else. And I said, what's like the hardest thing in the world to photograph? Oh, small moving objects that can fly, that don't respond to any human command, that are afraid of people. Okay, I'll try that. Yeah. And I don't know. I love birds my whole life. I always was fascinated with as a kid. I had a couple of chances to go out and shoot with some top-notch birders, and it just stuck to me. And it's like a sickness. I warn your audience, don't do it, because it's very, very addicting. It's incredibly addicting.
Pretty damn good sickness.
It's a very expensive too, by the way.
That's going to be the next question, actually, because to get this sort of these photographs at the standard that you've done, but even to attempt it, you've got to have some pretty decent equipment. I don't want to bore too many people. Let's talk about equipment briefly with regards to how you go about your business.
Well, you know, my day-to-day bird photography kit is the new Canon 1DX Mark II.
Right.
I have 5 of them. And because I don't like to change lenses. In the field, it's very time consuming to change lenses. And if a bird flies by, I mean, 10 birds can fly by in the time it takes to change one lens. Of course, the big glass, I use the 800 Canon 800 f5.6, the 600 f4 IS2. Probably my favorite birding lens is the 400 DO IS Mark II, which is very lightweight. Diffracted optics is a technology that Canon uses to make big glass much smaller, and paired with a 2x teleextender, that's actually hand holdable. And on the new 1DX Mark II, all 61 autofocus points work with a 2x teleextender. So I can use that lens as a 400, a 560, or an 8. So I use that a lot. For short work, I use the 1-400 f5.6 Mark II. And for super short work, the 70-200 f4. Everyone else uses the f2.8 and uses the IS, but it's a trade-off. At f4, you don't need the IS. I use that for my flight shots.
I'm interested about the f-stops on these lenses. They're all what I would term sort of pretty on the high end, f4, 5.6, that sort of touch. What's the ISO rate that you're using generally with your camera?
Oh, well, the 1DX Mark II works great all the way up to 6400.
Yeah.
I mean, we try to shoot around 400 if we can, of course, but all day long at 8 and 1600, 3200 if necessary. And if the conditions are decent, I can make 6400 work for some, because I print really big. You know, very few people print these days. I print 20 by 30s all day long. So I have to have pretty good, clean shots to print that large.
What's your workflow after you've finished your work, Scott? You use Lightroom, or you are on another system?
Well, I use Lightroom. I used to use Aperture. I was the king of Aperture while it was still going, but when Steve Jobs died, Tim Cook killed it, and that was that. So yeah, I used Lightroom, and I actually, now that it depends. If I'm in the field, I use Photo Mechanic strictly to take a quick look, because that's such a fast program. It just loads them brilliantly. You can see what you're looking at super fast. And then I immediately start making copies onto my Drobos and making sure I got everything backed up. When I get back to the office, I bring my Drobo Mini, which is a portable Drobo that has a large capacity, and I connect that to my main computer, and then I dump everything into Lightroom, decide what I'm going to keep. Anything that I'm going to keep, I then run through a plugin called Perfect Exposure by a company called Athentech, which is a free plugin, by the way. It just gives me a 0 point that I know is accurate without changing color. Then I move everything into Photoshop to finish, and I'm not a fancy guy in post. For me, 30 to 60 seconds is pretty much average. If I really have to work on a photo, I'm in there 90 seconds.
That's what I was going to ask you, actually, because there's a lot of people I speak to that say, I see the photo, it works, thank you, I'm going to use it. It doesn't, I dump it. And it's been said many times, if I've got to work on a photo for over a minute and a half, I'm probably wasting my time.
Well, in the bird photography world, if you're shooting for publication, I mean, it's very, very, very competitive. And, you know, not only do you have to have perfect light, you have to have a perfect specimen. If the bird's got a missing feather, they're not going to take it anyway. The angle has to be perfect. Everything has to be perfect. So it's pretty quick for me. If I think it's a saleable shot, then I can finish it off pretty quickly in Photoshop. I don't not touch things in post because I'm a purist. I just do it because I'd rather put my finger on the shutter button than the mouse button. That's just the way I'm wired. I'd rather be out shooting. Now, there are people who are the opposite. They'd rather do the post work, and that's fine. Yeah. I'm just not that guy. I want to get back out in the field because I'm looking for the next bird.
Exactly. Let's go to screen share and look at some of this work, because be prepared to be astounded, folks.
That's very kind of you.
It is just straight out of the top slot. You should be seeing, I'm just widening the screen a little bit so we can get a better feel of the site here. Latest work. Let's stick with the latest work because I'm very mindful of the time. But you know, this first one here is just, it's a wow. to
Thank
me.
you. Yeah,
It's a wow.
that's taken. I take a trip every March to Florida. It's when the birds are in breeding plumage and they're trying to get girlfriends. This guy's taking twigs to the tree, trying to build a nest to impress a girl. And if she likes it, she'll accept the twig. If not, she'll reject it. And he's off to the next one. And
Off to the next one.
I
Yeah.
saw where the sun was, and I saw where his perch was, and I thought if I got directly underneath him, I could get him backlit, and it worked.
Yeah, superb. Absolutely superb. And interesting enough, this is a mono image.
Yeah, I actually love to do mono images with birds. I use Tonality Pro from Mac Fun to do my conversions because it's very powerful and fast. And this one here, it struck me that it was fairly monochromatic even in color because it was a backlit high contrast shot.
Yeah.
So it just worked that way.
A little bit of trickery there by the looks of things with the
yeah, this is actually slow motion shutter speed kind of thing, panning, and then I used topaz impressions to make it look like a painting. But I liked where the cloud was in position to the bird's wings. It kind of looked like the cloud was exhaust from his wings.
That's right. Yeah, sort of a
and same behavior, by the way, bringing a twig in.
This
is a snowy egret in display mode. He's got the colorful beak trying to attract the girls, displaying his feathers for them, try to get their attention. I love shooting against black backgrounds. I do some exposure tricks to make the background go black because it really highlights the bird. That's kind of something I'm known for.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I was going to ask you how you did that. Another bird taking a twig to a potential mate by the looks of things.
Yeah, and this is a tricolored heron. Everyone comments that this looks like a Pterosopolis or something
it does, yeah.
from a dinosaur movie. And then when you look at the next shot, you see it close up. You see why, because they have scales.
Just love the detail on it. This is using this Canon 1DX Mark II.
Actually, this was shot with the 1DX. This is the week before I got the 1DX Mark II. So this was the 3-year-old camera.
I remember when Martin Bailey got the first 1DX, and he did pretty much the same as yourself. He loved it so much he went back the following day and bought another one. It was very important to him, this sort of quality of work that you get with it.
Yeah, this is a skimmer. This is a bird that I've been trying to photograph for 10 years, and I finally got a good one. They skim along the water looking for their food, and I liked his reflection showing his beak.
Superb. Let's go to another project very quickly. Hopefully we can do
go to raptors down there.
Raptors, yeah. I was just going to
tend to not see raptors as often as I do. So
look at the color on that bird, isn't that beautiful?
That's a barn owl sunning himself.
Yeah. Superb color, and this one
that is a barred owl, not to be confused with barn owl. Yeah, that's taken in Spain.
Love this one. Love the movement.
Fastest animal on Earth, the peregrine falcon. They fly up to 230 miles an hour.
Nearly as fast as you in a car.
Yeah.
as long as there's not a brick wall in the way.
Yeah, this is you don't want to hit the wall. No. This is the only bird that hunts in packs. That's fascinating to me. Really? You don't think of birds as as being cooperative, but this bird hunts in packs. It's called a Harris's hawk. They're extremely skittish. I sat in a hot blind in Texas for 3 days to get this shot.
Amazing. See, this is the bit where you find me being a street photographer lover, and I do a little bit of landscape, and I love doing my architecture. You guys go out and you're out in the field for days waiting for that one opportune moment. And,
it's a lot of waiting. This is a Eurasian eagle owl. Very pretty bird.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the detail that you've got out of this with these shots. It's quite amazing.
That's an osprey.
Amazing. Yeah.
Oh, that's
looking at you, kid.
That's a cute little owl called a burrowing owl. In Florida, I photographed this when I happen to have a map with about 50 really good burrowing owl nests that are productive every year. And you typically could drive by these birds and never see them because they're only about 6 inches tall and they're on the ground.
Yeah. We'll stop on this one, which is the bald-headed eagle, is it?
Yeah, this is the symbol of the United States. The bald eagle. This is up in Chinapoot Bay, Alaska, in a snowstorm. We love it when it snows. Yeah, I go up there almost every year. I'll be leading a workshop up there again this year in March in 2017. I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Fantastic. A great synopsis and a great coverage of your work there. Absolutely superb photography, Scott.
Thank you, sir.
Let's talk about your podcasts. How did it all start off?
Well, excuse me. Actually, I started with a website. There were no such things as blogs. I started November 2nd, 1998, which is 18 years ago, believe it or not. I started photofocus.com, and I called it an online magazine. There were no such things as blogs or podcasts when I started the website. But years later, when we got RSS, I converted it to a blog, and I started the podcast just because I had done a show a year earlier called TWIP. And some people that listen to this might be familiar with TWIP, and most people don't know that I co-founded TWIP with Alex Lindsay and Ron Brinkman. Steve Simon, who's a well-known street photographer, photojournalist, was the first guest we had. We did it at a Macworld show, and we did that show for 1 year. And I'd made a deal with Alex. I would do that show for a year, and we'd see how it went. And then I kind of just decided I wanted to do my own thing. So he took TWIP, which eventually got taken over by Frederick Van Johnson, who's a good friend of ours, and I started Photofocus. And so we've done Photofocus. I think now we're in our 8th or 9th year of Photofocus, and we've done at least 3 shows. I think we're up to about 7 now a month for that length of time, and we never missed.
When I first came across the show, you had Juan Lepon working with you, and he's still a regular guest on your show, is he? Or
no,
separate ways.
Who?
Juan
Pons?
Juan Pons, yeah.
He's been a guest. He was never a regular.
Oh, okay, right. Sorry.
He's been on TWIP shows, not on my shows.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because Frederick Van Johnson was my in actual fact very first guest. I couldn't believe it. I sent him an email asking to join me on the show. I just couldn't believe it. That he said,
Frederick and I did the Aperture Nature workshop together, sponsored by Apple. So we got to. That was a fun thing where I took 4 different workshops that we did where we gave the workshop seats away courtesy of Apple, and we brought 3 working pros and 4 working pros and 4 students to each of the 4 workshops at different national parks. And I hired Frederick to do one of those with me, and he was great to have along. And we've shot together on a couple of different occasions. We've worked on Leo Laporte's stuff before. He's a very talented combat photographer from the Air Force. Most people don't know that about him, but he is a stunning photographer. Everyone just thinks he's a radio personality on the podcast, but he's actually a very, very, very keen.
No, I quite agree with you. The story that he told me when he was working with the Air Force was in a helicopter and a rocket had taken off, and the rocket exploded. And everyone says, "Put your cameras away. You're not none of those photographs are going to be published." Which is
that's the way that works.
Yeah,
that's
exactly
the way that works. So we've been doing the podcast for a long time. I wanted to retire, so I had a friend named Richard Harrington who is well known in the video space and has done some photography and written a lot of books. He's ghost written, like if you bought the books for many different excuse me, somebody just rang my doorbell. I apologize.
Don't worry.
I'm gonna have to get him because he's gonna keep ringing it if I don't answer it. I'm sorry. It's very embarrassing. Hang on a second. Can I get back with you in about 10 minutes?
Yeah, you need me to come back?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Natural day's life. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. The thing is that I sold the company to Richard, and Richard owns it now. And then I retired, and I kind of got bored. And he said, "Look, you want to come back and help me run things again?" So I said, "Well, I don't have anything else to do," and so I came back. But the great thing about it now is, for years I owned it. For 15 years I owned it, which meant I was responsible for it. Now I'm not responsible for it, so now I'm just a kid having fun.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Did you work? So you mentioned Leo Laporte there earlier on. Did you work with Leo?
Oh, absolutely. I did more than 150 episodes with Leo of MacBreak Weekly. I've been on Twit. I had a studio in San Francisco for a long time, and we were together on and off for a couple of years.
I used to really love Twit Photo. I thought it was a great concept of a program that he had there. It's a shame that he didn't get enough followers.
We did a show called the iLive Zone on his network for a while, and yeah, in addition to the Photo Focus podcast, I've got a whole bunch of other podcasts I've done in the past, a lot of technology shows and some other photography related shows. Now I host the Photo Focus Mirrorless podcast with Marco LaRousse, who's a brilliant street photographer from Germany. I host the Inspiration show with him as well. I co-host the Q&A show with Rich Harrington now, and I host a business of photography podcast with my good friend Skip Cohen, who's the ex-president of Hasselblad USA and one of the top guys at WPPI and Rangefinder Publishing for a long time before he moved on. So those are the 4 main shows, and then I do a 5th news show with Ron Pepper, who's a panoramic photography specialist, and we call that the Problem Solving Podcast. So I went back from 0 podcasts a month to 5 just on Photo Focus Network alone.
Yeah, that's keeping you well busy by the sound of things. Want to ask you a question before we go to my favorite 2 questions I ask everyone. I'm very mindful of the time. What's your favorite car?
You talking about a street legal car?
No, well, I'm going to put the whole bunch out there. What's your favorite car? Favorite car you've driven? There we go.
Oh, that I've driven? I'd have to be honest, the Jaguar XJL Portfolio, because consistently it's the best car for the money. It'll go fast when you need it to. It's extremely comfortable. Heck, if it's good enough for the Queen, I'm lucky enough to have owned 3 of them. And I really loved them. I love Jaguars. I've owned a lot of Jaguars.
That's lovely. Lovely story. If it's good enough for the Queen, it's good enough for me.
Yeah, it's good enough for the Queen. It's good enough for me. She rides around in a green one. I've seen her in it, and I've had a white one, a blue one, and a black one.
Well, just this last week, I was out on a business trip to Monaco. I had to do a site survey for some work, and the couple of evenings we went up to around the casino area, and well, I think you would have had a ball. Lamborghinis, Ferrari GTOs, there were Bentleys, there were Rolls Royces. They were all there. It was amazing.
Well, I've had the opportunity to drive pretty much all the cars you just mentioned. The problem is that there becomes an issue of practicality.
Yeah.
As my Buddhist friends say to me, you don't own those cars; they own you.
Yes.
And you can't drive a Ferrari 458 Italia to the grocery store and not worry about it. So the nice thing about the Jaguar XJL is it's expensive enough to be a nice car, but not so expensive that you can't recover if it gets a door ding.
Yeah, that's right. I know exactly what you're talking about, especially when I saw a car outside the casino and it had a sticker on it, hands off.
Yeah. Well,
don't touch.
That doesn't even that doesn't always work, trust me.
No, exactly right.
I have a friend who has a Bugatti Veyron, and when he travels with it, he has his staff travel with him, and they go rent 2 cheap Ford Focuses to park on either side of it so nobody will damage it. And I'm like, that doesn't sound fun to me at all. I mean, that's just too much worry.
Right, yeah. There's too much worry, isn't it? Okay, yeah. Back to a little bit of a serious question then now. My favorite question to ask my guests is who would be their favorite photographer? Have you got a favorite photographer, Scott?
Wow, now that's a really good question. I think the photographer I would say who's my favorite because he inspired me the most is little known, but his name was Paul Strand.
Yeah, and Paul Strand, yeah.
He did some amazing work in the 30s, and yeah. I get to look at a lot of photography in my job, and I'm just amazed at how many times I'll go to a Paul Strand exhibition, and it's like the images are always new to me again, and yeah. I can get lost in his work. And it's very unusual because it's absolutely nothing like my work. There's nothing there that people would draw the nexus between us. I just think he was a guy ahead of his time, and I tend to be very inspired by what he did. And
isn't it amazing when you think about these a photographer, which you've used the word as well, which is going to be my next question, inspiration or work that you just love looking at, and you always find something new about. Invariably, is one of the classic photographers back in the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, it is. It's important that photographers study the work of those who came before them so that they know, what the future could hold based on what the past did.
Yeah, exactly. So I was going to ask you the next question. I'm going to say who's been your inspiration, but I'm just going to switch it slightly. Who's been your influence in your photography?
Well, I'm probably most influenced by Ansel Adams, because I have to answer these questions relative to my 43-year career, not this
Yeah,
week.
exactly right.
And more than half of my career was spent shooting film and working in wet dark rooms and, learning the zone system. And it had a bigger impact on me than anything I've done since. So I'd say he was my most influential photographer, because I really learned how to do the wet dark room by studying his work.
An amazing photographer, and I'd really love to know, we will never know, but I'd really love to know what he would think of Lightroom, of Macs, of Epson printers on your desktop.
I can pretty much...
We'll forget about the microwave work that he used to do.
I can pretty much tell you that I have no idea, nor does anybody else know what he would say, other than I'm pretty sure he would never spend time on camera forums.
Yeah. Probably about right, actually. That's a very good answer to that one. Scott, yeah. I'm mindful of the time. We've just done a half an hour. I cannot thank you enough in such a busy schedule you've got for you joining me on my little old show.
Listen, it's an honor to be here, and I appreciate it. Send me a link and I'll tweet it out to everybody to come find your show. That's
brilliant. It'll take around about 10 minutes to load up onto YouTube, and once I do that, I'll send you the link. Thank you so much for
buddy.
that. Scott,
well, thanks for inviting me.
No worries at all. Well, just like to say to everyone who's been watching the show, that's been a real pleasure for me, an absolute honor to have Scott Bourne on my show. One of the classic photographers and podcasters. Suffice to say, if you're going out shooting this weekend, leave your camera bag at home. All the best to you. Bye for now.